Genki desu ka? Kyou wa Topic 21 Annual Events o Benkyou shimasu. Hajimemasu. Interesting topics in entry because we are going to explore two of the most celebrated events in Japan and Philippines. It is more interesting because holiday seasons are just around the corner. So, what are the main objectives that we need to attain in this topic? First, compare the annual events of Japan and Philippines. Second, discover how these events shape up one's culture, history, or religion. The main skills that will be developed are learning and innovating skills, and social and cross-cultural skills and learning skills. Learning and innovating skills can be developed by comparing the ways of celebrating Christmas and New Year in Japan and Philippines, both in the past and present generation, while cross-cultural skills and learning skills by identifying the parts of a Nengajo and realize its importance in Japanese culture. The language can-dos for this topic. First one can say what one did in the past. Can read a photo diary written in simple Japanese. Can say the first impression or give comments to a certain work using adjectives. And can sing the Japanese version of Jingle Bells. Here's the outline of each session. Session 1, learning about the different annual events in Japan. Students will learn about the different annual events in Japan and find similarities to Philippines. Session 2, analyzing the rules informing past tense of the verb. So students will identify the different form of verbs and the rules in making its past form. Session 3, comparing of Christmas and New Year practices. Students will read a photo diary of a Nihongo-jin and compare how holiday seasons are being celebrated both in Japan and Philippines. Session 4, discovering the culture of Nengajo in Japan. So students will learn about the culture of exchanging Nengajo in Japan. Then for session 5, students will be making of Christmas card or Nengajo. Then for session 6, which is the most awaited session because students will have mini Christmas party and Nihongo review quiz. So students will learn how to sing the Japanese version of Jingle Bell and take the Nihongo review quiz. In this session, students will promote learning and innovation skills, especially by discussing with classmates the similarities and differences of annual events in the Philippines and Japan. The language can do in this session is can describe activities during Christmas and New Year. So you're going to ask your students on how they are spending their Christmas and New Year. Then for our vocabulary, so we do have kyokai or church. Here's the outline of this session. First one, introduction. The teacher introduces the content of the card topic. Second, culture awareness and group discussion. Students discuss and share their impressions about the different types of annual events in Japan. Third part, Nihongo or review of verbs. So the teacher reviews the students about different verbs related to year-end activities. And the last one, reflection. Here are the materials that you're going to use. First one set of Japan's annual events miniature picture cards. So you can actually find this in our material book. One set of Japan's annual events miniature picture cards. And we have teacher's reference on Japan's annual events. So you can read the information about the Japan's annual events here. And here are the pictures. And in this session, we're going to introduce the Ganbaro list. And also, we will explain the rubric for J3 with fruits, so it is connected with our Ganbaro list. And again, you can find these materials in our entry material book on page 220. To introduce this session, you will ask the students about their favorite annual event and why is it their favorite annual event. You can actually ask your students to play a game to introduce the topic, like playing songs related to Christmas and New Year. Then let your students say the title of the song. After that, ask them what do they think this topic is all about. Then proceed on telling them the main objective of this topic, which is knowing the important annual events in Japan and compare those to what we have here in the Philippines. In this session, you will also introduce another part of our J3, which is the fruits. So, you're going to introduce the main goal of this part of our J3. This material can be found in our entry material book, page 222. Then this material is what we call the Gambaro list, which is related to making of their fruits. Then please explain how are they going to accomplish this Gambaro list. This material can be found in entry material book, page 219. After introducing the fruits and the Gambaro list, discuss with them the evaluation sheet for G3, specifically for evaluating their entries in the fruits. Then please provide a sample so that students will know how are they going to accomplish the fruit and the Gambaro list. This evaluation sheet for J3 can be found in our entry material book on page 220. And now let's proceed to the part 2 of session 1. And here, students will learn the different annual events celebrated in Japan. For part 2 of session 1, students will compare the Japan annual events and Philippine annual events. And I think it is more helpful if we're going to use a table like this, a table with 3 columns. So first column, Japan annual events. The second column, name of that annual event in Japan. And the third column, the Philippine annual events that we'll be comparing with Japan annual events. For this activity, students will analyze the picture, and based on the picture, they will determine the name of that annual event. Some students might be confused with some pictures, so the group may guess what is the event and must discuss basis of their answer. So this table will help the students to organize um, their answers. Another suggestion is, if the pictures are too vague or confusing to the students, you may look for another pictures. Then in the discussion part, you can also provide further explanation for each event, so they will have more knowledge about the annual event of Japan. Then after the discussion, you're going to ask the students to classify whether the annual event is a life event or a commemorative event. So to help the students identify it easily, you may define what life event and commemorative event is. So they can have a knowledge on how they can identify those annual events in Japan as to life events or commemorative events. Part 3 of the session is a Nihongo learning activity because you're going to ask the students to describe what are the usual activities they are doing during Christmas and New Year in simple Japanese. Okay, to start this part of the session and to signal that students need to answer in Nihongo and use uh, the Nihongo expressions that they have learned from previous topics, you can actually ask them these questions. クリスマスに何をする? お正月に何をする? For this part of the session, do not forget to introduce the kyokai ni iku. So you can follow the the sample flow of the conversation with the students to introduce the kyokai ni iku. Then after soliciting the verbs that they can use, you can have this table also. So for the first column, you're going to list down the verbs that they have learned already. Then students will form the sample sentence from those listed verbs. Finally, the last part of this session is reflection and assignments. And these are the sample questions to help the students organize their reflection. Do not forget to give the students their assignment, which is interviewing their parents, grandparents, or guardians on how they celebrated Christmas and New Year during their generation. Okay, so they will write their answers in their Nihongo notes. You can give the examples, then ask your students to use the Nihongo expressions that they have learned from the previous topics in writing their answers. Let's now proceed to session 2 of topic 21. In this session, students will promote learning and innovation skills by comparing the ways of celebrating Christmas in the Philippines, both in the past and present generation. So now they will use their assignments for this session. The language can do in this session is can say what you did in the past. So they will be learning the different rules in making the past form of the different verbs. Here is the session outline of session 2. First part is culture part, where students will discuss how the past generation celebrated Christmas and New Year. So they will be using their answers in their assignments. Then second part is Nihongo. So students will discover the rules on how to form the past tense of verbs. The continuation of that part is another Nihongo part where the students share how they celebrated Christmas and New Year using past tense form of the verb. Then last part is reflection. Here are the list of materials that you will be using in this session. First one, the flashcards of verbs in present and past form. So this will be prepared by the teacher. You have suru, shita, kuru, kita, taberu, tabeta, murau, murata, toru, totta, asobu, asonda, nomu, nonda, narasu, narashita, kaku, kaita, iku, ita. Second, teacher's reference in forming past tense. To introduce this session, The teacher will ask the students what they think is the most important annual event for Japan and Filipino. Then, after getting the answer, he will introduce the objective, which is um, students will discuss the similarities and differences of celebrating Christmas and New Year, both in the past and present generations, and learn new verbs to describe different activities related to these events. After telling the objectives of this session, you're going to ask the students to form in groups and share the result of their interview with their parents and guardians about how they celebrated Christmas and New Year during their time. So they should assign a secretary to take down notes of their answers in tabulated form using Japanese. Then after 5 minutes, so you will call on each group and ask for their answers. Then you will write on the board the common answers of each group. And the possible answers would be Kyokai ni iku, Rechon o taberu, Eiga o miru. So there are other Nihongo expressions that should be mentioned by the students. And if they haven't mentioned the following expressions, you can guide the students to state these Nihongo expressions. And these expressions are very useful for this session because they will be forming the past tense of the verbs. We are expecting that the answers of the students are in the present tense. So that is the time to say that since their parents or guardians celebrated Christmas during their time or in the past, they can form the past tense of the verbs. Then you're going to proceed to the next part of the session, and we're going to have an activity. So you're going to list down the different verbs that you have learned from the previous topics, and you will have a list of the past tense of the verbs, and you're going to ask them to match the present tense of the verb with that of the past tense of the verbs. But at this point, you will not say that the new forms are in the past tense. Then students will be able to match the verbs through observation of the first 1 to 2 letters. Then after matching the present tense and the past tense of the verbs, ask the students to group the verbs into 3 groups. We have group number 1, group number 2, and group number 3. Then the students will identify how these past tense were formed, and you need to look at the teacher's reference for the details of the rules informing the past tense. And in our entry, so you're going to discuss first the group 1 on how to form the past tense of group 1, then group 2, and group number 3. But I suggest for the easy explanation of the rules informing the past tense, you may start with group number 2, then proceed to group number 3, then lastly group number 1, because group number 1 is much difficult and it has different rules in forming their past tense. That's why I think it is better if we will discuss the formation of the past tense of the verbs. Um, Lastly, for group number 1. And to check whether the students learned how to form the past tense of the present tense of verbs. After the discussion, ask the students to look again at their assignment and say the activities that their parents or guardians did during Christmas and New Year using the past form. So, for example, kyokai ni ita, recho no tabeta, ega o mita, akai fuku o kita, Christmasu kyaroru o shita, shashin o totta, trompetu o narashita, presento o ageta, presento o morata, Christmas kado o kaita. So after checking if the students learned how to form the past tense of the present tense of verbs, you're now going to compare the activities of parents, guardians, and new generation during Christmas and New Year. So another table will help in organizing their thoughts. So it will compose of 2 columns. The first column, activities of parents or guardians during Christmas and New Year. Then compare it with activities of students during Christmas and New Year. And the points to be realized in this part or in this session is, so the students are expected to realize that although activities may change as time goes by, most of the activities are still being spent for family or friends bonding. And last part of this session is reflection. So we have here the sample guide questions to guide the students for writing their reflection. Okay, so let's proceed to session 3 of topic 21. In this session, students will promote learning and innovation skills by identifying the similarities and differences of celebrating Christmas and New Year in the Philippines and Japan. In this session, students will read a photo diary in simple Japanese. And here is the vocabulary list that will be used in this session. So we have osechi ryori, nengajo, jinja, otoshidama. So please check the meaning of the following words. Here's the outline of this session. So first one, we have the Nihongo review, where the students review the rules on forming past tense of verbs through a skit. Culture part. So students will discuss how Japanese and Filipinos celebrate Christmas and New Year. The last part is reflection. The materials to be used in this session are the flashcards of verbs, which are used in session number 2, and photo panel of photo diary of a Nihongojin about spending New Year in Japan. Session number 3, part 1, Nihongo review. So in this part, you're going to introduce the objective of the session. So the objective of this session is to continue learning the past tense of the verb and use it to say the activities that they do during Christmas and New Year. Then review the past tense of the learned Nihongo verbs present to past tense. You're going to show the flashcard of the verbs in the present tense, then the students will say the past tense of the verb.